All right, everyone, we're going to get started. First of all, I'll introduce myself. My name is Colin Burke. I am the career coach at ULM's Career Centre. Some of you may know me already, some may not. We're going to be talking today about CVs and cover letters as it pertains to professional jobs in the world of academia. Many that are pursuing degrees in pharmacy, family marriage therapy, EDD, all plan to go into, well, not all plan, but some plan to go into roles that entail research, teaching, and the likes of. So cover letters and CVs are going to be your two main documents that you're going to submit. Now, there are other documents to go alongside it, and we'll talk about that as we go through. Traditionally, though, a resume and a cover letter are your main documents for any job that you may apply for after graduation. But a CV is more pertinent towards research and or academia roles. And not only that, but your conventional cover letter is not the same as an academic cover letter. So what you may know to date about a cover letter has a little bit of room to grow within this lecture, I'd hope. If it wants to move. Okie dokie. So a Route to Career Centre, if you guys don't know what we do already, many of us or many students believe that we're solely responsible for resume writing and mock interviews, and that's pretty much all we do. And I was really happy to take the opportunity to do this lecture to show just how many areas we can cover and to the different types of students we can offer guidance into. Obviously, you guys are professionals who are looking to get involved in academia. And so when I originally started this role, CV reviews was not something that we actually offered as a service. But I did feel like through alumni contacting me or current graduate students and working with the College of Pharmacy, particularly Dr. Hilary Tice, that this was something that we did need to start to offer. And my own curiosity and potentially a future PhD student myself, I felt it was worthwhile to kind of train myself up on exactly how to write a CV, what the nuances were between different programs. And so we're going to talk an awful lot about CV writing today. So here are some of the services that we obviously offer. I did mention the top two already, but LinkedIn profile updates was something, again, that we didn't offer when I originally came into the role, but after COVID, seeing the virtual transition take place and probably the reduction in which we would meet employers face-to-face and the need for personal branding, I think it was a worthwhile thing to kind of integrate some help on LinkedIn profile updates and how to network through various different services that LinkedIn offer, like direct messaging and how to attract people to your profile, industry professionals that are pertinent to you. And so that is one of the other things that we offer, obviously job searching for students who are unsure about what they can do with their major, those sorts of things, making them aware of the array of areas they can go into with the major that they're pursuing. But on the topics of CVs and cover letters, which we're going to be primarily covering today, I'm going to start with the basics, of course. What is a CV? Potentially going into the resources to build your own CV, which is what most of you would want out of this lecture, is to be able to go away and say, this is my situation. These are the sections that might apply to me. This is what I'm currently missing, and this is what I need to add. So that's the value that I hope to add to each of your situations today. And as far as a cover letter goes, if you know a lot about cover letters from a job standpoint, as I said, there is a difference between what an academic cover letter is and how you can integrate meaningful points to secure that job in the academia realm within cover letters. So going into a CV, a curriculum vitae, funny enough, in Ireland, your curriculum vitae is actually your resume. So there's a difference between what type of CV, but the resume as a whole does not exist. So this is something that was confusing to me initially, but I actually like that there is a difference. It's a clear, distinguished title that separates the two. But it comprises of relevant information as far as work experience, professional development, and of course, for many of you guys, the most important component, research. Some PhD programs are more practical in nature and therefore don't necessarily prepare you for careers in academia. Some are more consultancy based or therapeutic. You're going to go let's say a PhD versus a PsyD, the difference is a PsyD is purely preparing you for clinical work, whereas a PhD is clinical work and research and of course teaching too. So the CV is largely built around what it is you do within an academia setting. So a resume might be applicable for those who go that more consultancy based route, but there are so many sections that go into being a faculty member that you accumulate over time that people need to start becoming familiar with, because the main thing with a CV is updating it as you go, because it just gets so long as you become a tenured or professor that it's really, really difficult to go to committees and write grants and not have track of what you're doing at all times. So that's one big piece of advice that you'll probably hear me say a number of times. The difference between that and a resume in a sense is because the resume is so concise, it generally follows a very strict format, okay? I'm pretty certain on the sections that you need within a work experience and, a resume that entails things like work experience education. And although those are present in the CV too, there's a lot more, I guess, nuanced headings that may be consistent for someone like in family and marriage therapy, but an EDD or a pharmacy student will not have. And I'll give you an example, and I'll probably say this again later too. For those in the pharmacy program, you're going to have clinical rotations, right? So that's going to get a whole section of its own. But for someone in EDD, that is not a component of the program. So therefore, that's going to be a section you might have, but it's not one in which someone pursuing a leadership role will have. So it just depends on the structure of the program. And it's as you branch into those senior or more paid academia roles, you're going to need to demonstrate what you did on those clinical rotations and exactly what it is that you learned, what areas you covered, the specificities of all of that. So you can see that within a resume, it differs quite a lot. And the length, as I said, 1 page for a resume, 2 pages if you're a real seasoned professional in your industry. But I've seen CVs for distinguished professors up to 50 pages. It gets absurdly long, right? So the good thing for you guys is right at this moment, it's probably not long, but it's going to get long. And we have to kind of prepare you for the possibility that it's going to get long. But academia jobs or academic jobs, we can kind of look at some of the various roles that you're going to find yourself in. I think departmental might be more pertinent for the leadership people, the EDD type roles that you might find yourself in, you know, vice president, department chair, program director, that type of thing. But ultimately, as you move through your career and you become more highly acclaimed in what you do, obviously departmental roles or head of department roles, it becomes a possibility for many of you. Research-based ones, we'll see titles like postdoctoral fellow. If it is a project or maybe a department in a university has a grant available for this particular topic, they might hire someone who has done a PhD to come on board and kind of give their expertise or contributions towards fulfilling that role. But many of which you're looking at those kind of top paragraph roles as your aim, right? Things like instructor are not limited to people who have PhD. There are many people who are instructors that only have master's degrees, but obviously the salary cap and what you're able to do within that becomes rather limited compared to when you have a PhD. So, you know, most of our reasons for pursuing a PhD is not only the ability to get more involved and climb higher throughout the ladder, but it's also because we have a higher earning potential too. And that is attractive. So the CV sections. Now, what I will say, disclaimer, these are not the absolute concrete sections that your CV and your CV might have. These are just potential sections, but saying that, professional experience, education, research in some nature are going to come into that factor. So, you know, some people do a PhD and a TA is a part of what they do. That's how they get their stipend. That's how they fund their education, if you will. So if you're looking to go in a teaching-based professor role, or it's not strictly research, then of course that's something you're going to want to have in there. Documentation of real experience, of course. But also something that Dr. K made aware to me is that as you become a more tenured professor, service becomes a component of your job role. So giving back to the community, the university, and various other things. Think of it almost like volunteer work for who you're representing, essentially. But more of the intrinsic or intricate titles that I want you guys to pay attention to are the things like publications. And then publications even splits into more refined headings like pending publications. Research that you've done that doesn't fall under a published article, which for most people, that might not be the case. If you're a first-year PhD student, you might not have anything published. So it's just a matter of title, supervisor, the project itself, the dates in which it happened, that sort of thing. And as you move through becoming a more distinguished professor, things like grants for research of crops of students that are coming in, fellowships, students you've mentored, because as you take on advisory roles and other things like that, you have to document that as well. So we're also pretty aware with things like conferences. If you've gone and done a poster presentation at a local, conference in the South, we know that one I've seen is Southwestern Psychological Association, SWAPA, if you will. That allows undergraduate and graduate students to come and pretty much on a massive page present exactly what they did, and explain the intricate findings that they found, and essentially kind of showcase their future possibilities for further research. And that's constantly what we're trying to do, is we're extracting meaningful data that can be interpreted and maybe even elaborated on with a future study. So references, we're all pretty aware with that. That's professional relationships that you've obtained through working in research, maybe even classes that you've taught or assisted with, and for some other people, but probably less relevant to your situations, job employers, but that's more resume type thing. Okay, so, I thought it would be pretty important for you guys to not just hear me talk about what sections are or what might look like for some of you, but actually give real examples. So one thing about the CV that's important to note is, as I said, it's not exactly a concrete format that you have to follow, but making it easy for the professor or potential hiring manager to articulate, or not even articulate, but understand what components are in each section. It's really, really helpful for them, right? So one of my key pieces of advice for a CV is make it easily legible. If it is confusing because there's inconsistency with how bold the headings are in some places, but not in others, if your dates are on the right side of the page for one section, but on the left on the other, it's very easy to track, or it's very hard to track exactly what it is you're talking about as you go through. So this example is more for, or at least I took this from a tenured professor in family and marriage therapy. Okay, so you can see there, pretty basic, that everyone can do this. The top header, that is, professional email, what it is you classify yourself as a professional, contact information, that sort of thing. And of course, education. So you can see there that there are use of italics within the thesis title. There is bold for the actual program. And then on the left-hand side, they have the dates. Then under professional experience, you can see exactly where they worked, what the title of their job was. And so it's a very legible document, and that's what you really want to kind of ingrain from the outset in this CV. But when it gets tricky is when you get down to the research component. You have to actually outline your studies in the format that you usually reference them. So if that's APA for some people and MLA for another, you want that to be consistent and also relevant to the realm that you're going to apply for. And I actually want to go back to this because I think it's really important. And many of you would know this from applying for PhDs yourselves, is that research interests and plans is very, very important. Okay. Why is it important? Because the person who's going to potentially hire you, especially for a research role or what the institution prides itself on, you need to show alignment. Does that make sense? So what I mean by that is, if this is a liberal arts university or it's somewhere that's really research oriented and maybe it's known for its research in a said area, make it clear that, number one, if you've done research in it before, it's visible, but number two, that you really want to stay in that area, okay? Because a faculty member wants to see a relationship that could potentially blossom between you. And, you know, if you're independently going and out there to apply for a PhD, it's one of the first things, rules of thumb, that you're told is like, make sure that it's visible that your interests align with theirs. So as you can see, this document is a pretty easy one to kind of locate the key information and where he's the responsibilities he's undertaken. So here's this is the same person's CV, it's just the following pages, but I wanted to show you this because he's got things like grant writing, teaching and advising, courses taught, look at the actual codes of the courses that he's outlined. And on top of that, in a previous section, he's got his old university where he taught and the research and statistics classes, so additional training. So how I think most students should segment it is keep research in one section and all the underpinning facets within research, like grant writing, like published papers, and then teaching and advising by itself also. And then if you want to make another heading for professional development, and just going back to the research for a second, if you've presented posters, that's relevant to research. So make a larger heading for the main headings and then subheadings on the left-hand side. And we're used to doing that because, well, doing a dissertation kind of demands a similar level of segmenting headings, right? Based on importance or based on the section or the chapter. So I would take a similar approach to this because what it does is it helps segment exactly what it is you're talking about and what umbrella this kind of falls under. Does that make sense? Okay, I'm going to move forward to the next one. I also put in a CV for pharmacy because I figured some people will want that. So again, very similar. I took the heading out because it had their name in it, so I didn't want to like release that. But it's important to know is that you'll see that the format is different, right? But it's consistent. So it's not necessarily, because people will ask me after this, oh, but Colin, he is on the right-hand side and he is the left, which is right. That actually doesn't matter. What matters is that it's legible and that it's consistent. That's the main thing that you need to keep in here, is that if I can track the information that I need to see in order for me to assess your candidacy, that's what's important, right? So you'll see here, he is the clinical clerkships, right? So as I talked about for many of you guys is that within your rotations, you're going to undertake roles within different departments or sections in whether it's community pharmacy or retail. You'll probably get exposure to a variety of those. And it's important to show well-roundedness where you can and keep a chronological timeline of when that happened, right? So it'll be really helpful to do that. And not only, you can see for the critical care pharmacy residency experiences, he has research at the top. And so that's his current role, but it's also relevant to what he's applying for because the research stands out almost immediately. I think for the most part, though, keeping it chronological is like your first heuristic for deciding what goes first, what goes last. So that's the continued clerkships, and internship experience was probably to do with what they'd done during their undergrad, I would imagine, or maybe it was first year of pharmacy school. But you can see the presentations that I talked about, poster presentations. I went into the School of Pharmacy last year and I seen posters everywhere of like data charts and everything like that. And it really made me think, I was like, how much of that are these students doing? You'd probably be able to tell me. But ultimately you can see that it's formatted in a very consistent manner, and there's a lot of these, which probably has been done over quite a long time span, but this is really helpful to show that you've kind of covered a wide array of areas and are committed to professional development. So I would say here are my summarized kind of, I guess, comments for what you should do here on out when it comes to writing your CVs. Good practices to categorize your headings. I talked about making the main headings stand out and then kind of create different styles, font, bold, underlined, italics, etc. for the subcategories, and making sure that you stick with that theme. Updating it regularly, I've talked about that. That's very, very important. And referencing styles must match the area you're going into. Professors in your industry. CVs are, this is a big tip, guys, to be honest with you. CVs are public. So you probably know that already, but any professor that you're interested in working with, you could probably see their CV on the webpage. So if you're looking to mimic, or not even mimic, but potentially look at interests, and they may have a paragraph on the webpage. You may not even need to go into the CV itself to find out what they're specialized in, but it can certainly give you an idea for layout and format and things that you might be missing after I've done this presentation, right? So you're thinking, I'm reviewing my CV and I'm thinking, I don't know if this has everything that it needs to have. You can go on a professor's page within, whether it's pharmacy or family marriage therapy or EDD, and see, oh, that section, I forgot I didn't put that there, right? And I know that I have experience in it. So it's important to utilize that resource when you can, because it's there and it's available. Okay, so I thought before I'd move into cover letters that I'd give people an opportunity to give me questions on CVs, so that, you know, it didn't just drain from your mind whilst I go into something that's also pretty heavy, or not even heavy, but it also has some key information that I want you to be able to absorb and not forget your questions from earlier. So has anyone got a question regarding CVs? Yes, sir.
In the professional experience, should we list all the experiences we have, like technical hand-on experiences? Is it a good option to put all the detail on the experiences, like research methods or hand-on experiences that we have on research?
So are you particularly asking whether you describe them or list them? In other words, the bullet points of what you did.
Yeah.
What I typically see there is that professors who are, again, have the longer CVs don't do that. I feel like new students kind of like feel like their CV isn't long enough. So they're like, I'll just tell them everything I did. But I think that's what the cover letter's for, is that as you develop research methods or reasons why you were able to obtain good results or interesting findings, methodologies, that's what the cover letter is for. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, and I think in a way, if resumes were a little easier, or at least like cover letters were valued more, I think that would be a distinguishment I would like in resumes too, because some people do a resume, give all their bullet points, and then just repeat the same thing in the cover letter, right? So it's like, what's the difference? Or at least why waste my time reading it? The good thing about the CV is like, it's giving you the what, but it's not giving you the how. And I think the cover letter, the great thing about cover letters is that you can describe how.
What about the job descriptions in a position, like previous job description, what I did on that organization or something like that? Should that make sense in a CV? Or
so roles and responsibilities? I think, again, it kind of comes back to similar principles in the sense of the problem with sometimes is listing bullet points or getting comfortable with doing that. In other words, what you did in a previous experience is that it might not relate to what you're applying for now. The good thing about a cover letter is the only things that you mention are the things that absolutely matter for this particular job. So it's not to say that what you have done doesn't carry any weight or that it doesn't matter, but in a cover letter, you're picking the most relevant information based on what this job description that you're applying for wants. So if it's a professor looking for extensive research in a set area of pharmacy, then you're going to talk about your previous experiences in a job that replicated similar responsibilities. But anything else is rather unnecessary, if you will. So I think that's the important thing to mention. And I enjoy that about CVs and cover letters, because once I read a CV and I see something potentially eye-catching, I want to read the cover letter, because I'm like, I wonder how they kind of got those findings, or how did they come to that conclusion. So I would say I understand what you mean, but I think leave it all in terms of titling or listing, and then leave the descriptions to the cover letter, and select the descriptions that you're going to talk about in the cover letter based on what the job description for this role you're applying for says. Now, the hard part is and I think one thing is, some people are like, oh, well, I'll forget what I did over time, right? Or that I won't, maybe I have a really good idea of what I did in this role and I want to write it down. I want to write it down because I don't want to forget it. And maybe that will help me for a cover letter in the future. So sometimes what I tell people is, you can bullet point your CV if you want, but take the bullet points out just for record purposes, or like for your memory, but take them out when you submit it or when you post it online. But some people like to kind of use, and I say the same thing for a resume, is like, you can have a 2-page resume if you want, because you want all of your information on it. You want every, key achievement that you got in your first job as a professional and things like that. But when it comes to applying for a specific job, condense it, make it very, very focused. Does that make sense? Because if you just bombard them with information that is, distracting, when they read 100 different CVs or 100 different resumes, you don't want them to get distracted by what is most important. You want to be able to clearly see, this person has X, Y, and Z, which we've articulated in the job description, and we don't want too much more beyond that. So you have to be selective. That's my personal opinion. So what I've seen is young students put everything on there. They're like, I describe all the things as I've had 3 jobs and I'm very proud of what I've done. And that's good. But I think as professors get more established in their careers, they don't feel the need to describe anything that we've done, because they're like, this thing is already 40 pages long. I don't need to tell you what I did in the 5 different academia jobs I've had before. It kind of speaks for itself, honestly. But academic cover letters. So does anyone know the difference between a standard cover letter and an academic cover letter? Okay, do you? Okay, so an academic cover letter is different, not in principle in terms of what you're trying to accomplish within the cover letter, but it does differ in a few different ways. One main way, I'm seeing, maybe I put this in the next page. Okay, page length. So business cover letters, we pretty much all know that a cover letter is just 1 page. An academic cover letter can actually be up to 2 pages. And it can be usually between 5 and 8 paragraphs. That's what it generally is. The extra page length does allow you to kind of go into a little bit more detail, which answers or feeds back into your question. You said, I want to talk about the key responsibilities and stuff that I had in previous roles. Well, the extra space does allow you to kind of, maybe some of the roles you had are, they're similar in nature in terms of relevance to this job. And so you can kind of plug in separate parts of each roles to kind of get your point across or show your suitability. So that's really important. And then you, of course, just like you would in a business cover letter, but in a different way, you're going to gauge the sequencing of information and in order to order based on what type of university or department that you're talking about. So I mentioned the comparison of liberal arts university versus a research institution. So in the opening paragraphs, not maybe the first one, but the second, third, and fourth, you would want your research experience to come first. Why? Because it's earlier into the whole reading process, and you want to, that's the characteristic of what that university looks for. So therefore, that's what you prioritize, right? And not only that, if it was the opposite, liberal arts, then you might talk more about your teaching. So it depends. I like one resource that I just have to share with you is Purdue. So we were familiar with Purdue's, like, I guess they're pretty highly acclaimed within like writing and tools for academic writing particularly. So they have some great guides on cover letter writing and making the distinguishment between business cover letter writing and formatting for academic positions. So some of the stuff I'm going to show you here actually is taken from their website, not even going to lie. But you can see job search cover letters, academic cover letters. The URL that I have at the bottom is what reference that I took some of this from. So here is a sample cover letter. So looking at the side where the yellow highlighted pieces are, that's telling them why you would opt to put this information in a certain position. So refer to the job title as it appears in the notice and state where you learned of the position. Notice that in the beginning, they have talked about who it's addressed to, things like that. And then below, you're going to see the field that they've studied in, or perhaps the pertinent pieces of information that talk about their teaching experience, talk about, you know, their research background. So they're kind of opening up the cover letter with the main things that make them stand out without going into too much detail, but just letting them know that from their work experience, this is what they have, okay? Now, second paragraph you'll see is, as my curriculum vitae shows, I have had excellent opportunities to teach a variety of writing courses. That's probably something that they're looking for. That's why they opened with that. In other words, writing courses is probably something similar to the job application they're making. You can see that on the side, it says, for a position at a small undergraduate college, emphasize teaching experience and philosophy early in the letter. So I think that's really important that you guys can distinguish how flexible changes need to be made based on what you're seeing. And that's the difference. Someone can read the cover letter, and if it's general, they're becoming confused on why any of this information matters, or how does it matter for them. Whereas when you read a specific cover letter, it's very deliberate in its approach, right? It's designed to catch your attention at key points so that when the person reads it, they're like, that's one thing that we're looking for. And so you're able to kind of get the attention and keep it so that they'll continue to read throughout the cover letter. So they said, describe your dissertation and future plans for future research. Emphasize links between your teaching and your research. And better yet, emphasize links between your teaching and research and the person that potentially is going to read this. So here's the second part. So we said that mention teaching experience early in the paragraph for if it's a small university, but on the flip side, if it's a large research institution, then the first paragraph, second paragraph will be largely dominated by research experience. Okay. Now you had mentioned that the methodologies or the roles and responsibilities, the good thing about the cover letter is here is when you're starting to go and give the models, the rationale, and all the pieces of information that contributed towards your decision making in the paragraph. So I relay critical readings of theoretical text to my own pedagogical experiences, or experiments, I should say, as a writing teacher. So you can see that key word of writing teacher coming up again. So obviously that's a common factor in what they're trying to get across here. Is, in other words, I'm competent in this area. So I'm assuming this is for that position. After developing my dissertation into a book manuscript, I plan to continue my work in composition theory through a critical examination of rhetoric of technology advancement in computer meditated writing classroom. So again, plans for the future, that probably matches something to do with the professor's interests. And so you can see how that's kind of continuously being emphasized throughout. And then things that they've learned throughout their graduate program, maybe there was a change in, I started out being interested in this, but what I found through doing X, Y, and Z, that I'm actually more passionate about this. And again, that kind of relays back into what it is the professor is looking for. So you can see here, refer to relevant materials available on the web. So in all of my writing courses, I encourage students to become more critical readers and thinkers. My goal is to not always only to promote their intellectual engagement with cultural context of all kinds, but also to become more discerning readers of and forceful readers about the world around them. So I think that's really useful as well, because they're giving a reason to what like philosophy they have regarding their teaching approach. Okay, so there might be findings or I guess methods that you have implemented through doing consistent research that you feel are critical to getting certain outcomes that you want. Okay, and that shows that you're not only just going to do the job, but there's reasons behind why you do it or why you deem it's effective. And that's kind of the difference between someone who is just applying for the sake of it versus someone who really knows their craft inside out. So, you know, in conclusion, the cover letter is to be wrapped up by reinstating the main components of what makes you a good candidate. So, you know, summarizing the research experience in said area, the courses that you've taught in this area, and then kind of maybe talking about values within the university. And that's something that I potentially did not mention. You should analyze the university's website. And I talked about the difference in research and, of course, a liberal arts university. But if you're seeing on the About page or the homepage of the university or the program or the department, they have a philosophy or mission statement that really is driving what they do. When you're talking about your methods and experiences, etc., and you believe that there is a connection between what this university prides itself on or what this department prides itself on, and you've had similar thinking or, again, applications of what you do, you want to make that connection. Why? Because it would allow them to see that you're the character or you have the values that they have. So where you have examples of that, that's really going to attract them to choosing you as an ideal candidate. So many of these things can be easily located because the university has a homepage that they believe that they have, or let's say they have a list of values that they believe they embody through the students that they attract or the topics that they continuously find themselves developing. The CV cannot locate these things. It cannot tell you or not tell the hiring manager why it is you're applying for this university or why this particular institution matches personal attributes or values that you have. That's what the cover letter is for. So not just true professional practice of experiences, etc., but real internal belief systems can be communicated on the cover letter. Does that make sense? So the keys to success, I mean, I don't think I need to say this to professional students, although I feel with undergrads, it's never a harm. You know, the specifics versus the general. A general cover letter that doesn't really take in a lot of those factors that I discuss is going to come across as vague, a one-size-fits-all approach, and potentially, if you're mentioning the same points, redundant. Specific shares alignment between, as I said, values, research interests, between you, the institution, or the hiring manager, professor, if you will, and makes references to relevant accomplishments and experiences, and then is organized in a way that prioritizes the key information early and then kind of accounts for the less relevant information. And I say less relevant, I'm not saying irrelevant, because we don't want any irrelevant information on the cover letter, but less relevant comes later. And that way, the reader is going to continue to be engaged and assess your candidacy based on what they're seeing. And so academic cover letters, as I said, give you more leeway to do that, given that it's 5 to 8 paragraphs, max 2 pages, versus the 1-page standard cover letter that you will have on a job. I feel like those really rush you to get key facts in there early, and there's not a lot of reasons to give, or not even reasons, but it doesn't give you a lot of room to explain why. Some people, when they're using structure within paragraphs in a cover letter, they like to use the STAR format: situation, task, action, result. That can be a helpful way of documenting achievements and a basis for why you did what you did. I haven't seen that done particularly in academic cover letters, but it can give you the opportunity to share the situation you were in. You wanted to make a breakthrough or development in an area that this professor is interested in. Here's what you did. Here's the actions that you took. and the results that you derive from the findings. So it can be a very simple format to kind of guide you through paragraphs 2, 3, 4, maybe even 5. So when you're mostly talking about research, teaching experiences, you can talk about the methodologies that you implemented as well, and why that relates to the values that they have as an institution. Okay, questions on cover letters? I don't know when receiving no questions is either I explained it so well that you just couldn't possibly have a conversation or a potential question, or is it that I've confused you so much that there's no understanding of what I just said for the last 20 minutes. The bottom line with cover letters is that it takes practice. And taking in account for the factors that, did you add values in there, or alignment? Is it clear between that institution, that department, professor, etc.? Are the accomplishments that you mentioned, are they most relevant to this particular role? Those are the key things that you will get better at over time. And it's obviously easier to do it as you accumulate experience, right? Refining and selecting experiences based on having so much that you don't know what to do with them is the easy part. The hard part is when you're starting out as a PhD student, you're like, this kind of is relevant, but it's not really. And so I haven't done research in this specific area, but how do I communicate that I want to, right? That's the harder part. But, as you go through this journey and you obtain more roles, refining is the easy part, because you're just like, this is rubbish, this is perfect, this is somewhere in between. You kind of get a gauge of what you can put in 2 pages and what's a waste of time. So I would just think that, yes.
What do you think, how much important is the cover letter is compared to the CV?
I think what the cover letter will communicate is more about your genuine interest. I talked about the comparison of a general versus a specific one. The cover letter gives them, because of the explanations that you give, the why, if you will, behind the teaching methods, behind the research areas, behind your rationale for picking this university, or the values that you mentioned, that gives more of an idea of who you are as a person, why a working relationship should be established with you. The CV cannot communicate that. The CV tells you the credentials, of course, and it gives them an insight to, well, this person's continuously researched in X, Y, and Z area, so he must kind of like it. But I've sat in recently to meetings within, let's say, the ULM strategy that they're trying to develop, and I can see that the kind of attitudes that they're trying to attract, within the professors that come in, and the cover letter is a better opportunity to give an idea about your attitude or your thought process, your critical thinking, versus versus the CV, which is just purely cut and dry, if you will. It's very to the point. Yes.
So would you say that it's more important to focus on the presidents of the universities, mission, or more your department?
More department. The more contextual, the better. The president's not the hiring manager, yeah. The professor is. So I would just say that let's put it on a hierarchy. Let's say there is an opportunity or there is not an opportunity to reference a department's mission statement, but there is something subtle about the university that still somewhat relates. I wouldn't take up an entire paragraph talking about that, but selecting somewhat of an instance that fits the kind of scheme that you're going with, I would insert it, because again, it still shows that you've taken the time to pinpoint something unique about the university, where that comes down to a competition between you and someone else who didn't. And again, I reference the fact that I've been present in some of these meetings when attitudes is something they value. And I can tell you at ULM, it's going to become something that's provided they get adequate candidates. But let's assume that the institution we're applying for is a popular one in which are very much values the type of people they're getting in there and have the luxury of attracting a wide variety of candidates who am I picking? Am I picking the person who decided to make reference to something that about our university versus the person who didn't? You know, I can tell you that it's, if you do that, you'll absolutely get hired. The answer is it depends, but I think it definitely doesn't hurt. And as I said, don't waste tons of time doing it. But ideally, the department's mission statement comes first, and then creep your way down towards a more institutional mission statement, or values. Some people have on web pages have bullet points of just things they embody, and then some are just paragraphs. So you're trying to derive the key words from that. That's something that you ought to do. But I think, you know, specific, focused, customized, whatever way you want to say it is the way to go. Yes, sir.
Like you showed the academic cover letter. Is that also relate to the research fellow positions? Like so, the cover letter can have the details on the research experiences for the research fellow positions cover letter or something.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm not hearing you correctly. Are you saying that if you've done research experience and it's for, not for a postdoctoral fellow, but it is for a professor position, that you should highlight what you did in your research? Is that kind of what you're saying?
Like postdoctoral fellow positions, like it also like same format as the academic cover letter.
Yes, and I'll reference you. I will say a confident yes, but I would check. That's a great question. I would check the Purdue website that I listed there, purdue.edu or owl.edu, and then it's / academic cover letters. I know on that webpage they do articulate every instance whereby you will use an academic cover letter versus a business cover letter. But when they say academic, I believe that's any professional position that exists beyond the PhD itself. Does that make sense? So a postdoctoral fellow, of course, is that, right? It's not a professor position, but it is something you do only after you've completed your PhD. So I would imagine that applies to a postdoctoral fellow as well, even though I get what you're saying, because largely that letter is going to be focused only on research. So that may not take up tons of space, where when you have to apply for a professor position, you have to mention not only teaching experience and research. The thing is, that's not to say that it's going to hurt you if it's not 2 pages long, because it's an academic cover letter. If you start to get to paragraph 5 and you start spitting all sorts of, you know, redundant information, you ought to close it out there. Does that make sense? Just because it's an academic cover letter doesn't mean, oh, I have 4 extra paragraphs I can use here. I have to use them all. You don't have to. Pick what's relevant, keep it focused, and whenever it's time to stop, whenever you feel like I'm just kind of rambling on or repeating the same stuff, leave it alone. I think that's a case-by-case decision that you'll make. But the main thing I would say is that it can be longer, not that it has to be longer. Does that make sense? And assuming that it's a more professional position means that we're accounting for more things that you've done, therefore we need to give you more space to talk about them. But it doesn't mean you have to use 8 paragraphs. You get what I'm saying? Yeah, but I would definitely just double check on the Purdue website, but I'm pretty confident that it is a yes to using academic cover letters also. Any other questions?
I've noticed just by looking at applying to PhD programs that a lot don't necessarily ask for a cover letter, but ask for a personal statement. So is that just dependent on the program, or is that more normal for PhD applications?
That is very normal for a PhD application. Statement of purpose, personal statement. It has cover letter-like formatting. The big thing within a personal statement that I think differs from, say, an actual cover letter is that somewhere within the latter stages of the statement of purpose, you will mention, number 1, the advisor you want to work with. In other words, the chosen faculty member that relates to your interests, and then potential topics of interest that you are wanting to explore. Usually the university website will say that. State your top 3 professors and topics of interest. That's kind of what you're supposed to do there. With statements of purpose versus cover letter, as far as I'm aware and that I've read on it, it is very much the same. The only thing is some statements of purpose I've seen it 3 to 5 pages, or will have a character limit, but there's no standardized. Every institution in the US use a 5,000 character cap on it. But when I take a look back and go, if it's 3 pages, what you put in those 3 pages are still much of what I just said in terms of starting off with your reason you're applying for it, you know, getting off with those values and explaining relevant experiences, whether it's research, teaching, etc. Like it's the stuff, the content is very similar. The thing is, before a PhD program, you've probably less because you haven't obtained maybe, I mean, if you're a pre-pharmacy major, may haven't done a lot of rotations yet. So it's like, what are you going to talk about for 3 pages? They will usually specify. And one thing that I would absolutely, without a doubt, say to students is that if they don't specify, ask, so that you don't waste the statement of purpose by just rambling because you think it has to be 3 pages. They may say it can be 3 pages max, not it has to be 3 pages, because those two things differ, because it's quality, not quantity. On top of that, I would say that always connect with a faculty member before. Like, it's not a written rule, but it most definitely is one of the most beneficial things you can do, is start to connect and build a relationship with the faculty member and say, introducing yourself professionally. As a master's student, I have been undertaking research in X, Y, and Z area. I have noticed via reviewing your CV that I have similar interests. Can't understate, because they want the person who's going to work with them for 4 years. Who is that? Is that the person who threw in their application, or is that the person who reached out a year in advance and goes, no, I've been monitoring your work for a while now, and I'm actually making some gains in my own personal research. I can just tell you from the students I like to work with, it's the people who take initiative. And I'm sure with professors it's no different, because they meet different types of students every day. And so who's the one that they want to spend 4 years with? And I think that's really important. Does that answer your question somewhat? Yeah. The main thing is, if you are unsure, find out. In other words, don't be afraid to, there might be, if it's a massive program, they might have their own administrative staff for stuff like that. So you would want to write to them, because they'll know the intricacies of what the materials should have. Professor may not get back to you because of a high, workload. And honestly, they just review the stuff. They don't know how long it has to be. That's why they have administrative staff for them, application processes, if you will. So I would just say, if it's unclear on what they want, 3 pages max, cover letter, statement of purpose, they usually will answer your questions if you ask. That's why they have webinars and all sorts of different things if the PhD program is popular, so that you can just go in and bang out all those questions. So again, I like this work. I like this description of any answer. It depends is the answer. It's not, I don't like black and white. It's gray, but those are the steps to handle it, and maybe develop a white versus a black. Any other questions? Okay, folks on Zoom, those who attended here, I really appreciate your attention, your questions. I love working with the senior people, because you just guys don't skip any steps into getting where you want to go. Freshman, sophomore, it's hard to get much out of them, but maybe that's my fault. But for those of you who have joined us on Zoom, I hope this lecture was beneficial. As I said, I'm going to share this on YouTube at the ULM Career Center webpage. If you need anything from me, I haven't put my email here, but careercenter@ulm.edu for one-to-one CV reviews. I always say to people, like, I can sit here and present to you, talk about all the things that we should do in a certain situation, but when I have a specific case, a program, your CV, it's way easier for me to get down to the nitty-gritty and work alongside you with that. So if that's something you require, we're 139 Sandal Hall, first door on the right as you come into Sandal. I'd be happy to work with you, and guys, best of luck in all your endeavors. Thank you.